What can we learn from the past lives of Ghislaine Maxwell? Welcome to Trevor's Tarot, Astrology, and Spirituality. First off, a huge thank you to everybody who's subscribed to the channel. Thank you for liking, watching, commenting on the videos, sharing the videos, promoting the channel on your own social media platforms. It's all greatly appreciated. If you've donated money to the channel through the super thanks, buy me a coffee, Venmo, huge thank you. It's all greatly appreciated. So Ghislaine Maxwell's story is in a lot of ways similar to Donald Trump's in the sense that she can't seem to learn this karmic lesson that rich men, well, not all rich men, but some rich men, especially in the ones that she encounters, are never going to treat her equally and are always going to make her kind of the fall person. So the first past life that I picked up on that I thought was pretty interesting took place in probably the 1300s, somewhere in that range, in a port city in either Greece or Italy. It feels more like Italy. Uh, she was married to a merchant who I think was trading silks and spices and all those things, and had made a lot of money. And she did remedial things for him, um, like keeping books and so on and so forth. And what eventually happened, or my perceivedness of what I perceived to happen, was eventually it turned out that he wasn't well liked by everybody. He thought that people thought that he was cheating them, and he tried to blame her for almost everything. And she eventually um, ends up just, taking her own life because, they were becoming penniless and broke, and there just wasn't this lavish lifestyle that they were living before. And so it's curious how this relates to the current iteration that she's living through. And when we get into some of these other lives, I think we'll see there's a lot of similarity here in the themes, and it's curious to how that might parallel today's iteration. So, what should we learn from this iteration of her as this merchant's wife, I guess is what we'll call it? What are we supposed to learn from that? Yeah, I think I, trust. Um, Trust is both a great part of humanity and also a vulnerability. And I think for her in this iteration and in probably today's iteration too, um, the trust is just misunderstood, misplaced. This doesn't excuse any of her behavior at all. So, okay, what are we supposed to learn from this iteration? Okay, it feels like money is a very corrupting force. In particular, I think some people are more vulnerable to it than others. Yeah, I mean, poverty, if you're wealthy and then you have to live poor, which is kind of similar to what's going on in today's iteration, it's hard to handle. In this iteration, she took her own life, or it appeared that way. I feel pretty confident that that's what happened. And it felt like it was just because there was like this constant nostalgia for what was. when life was rich and plentiful. And then when life was hard, it's like she couldn't handle it. And her husband, I think, was probably murdered. Yeah, didn't really see that, but that would be the guess because she was alone later after they lost everything. So, yeah, big events change life courses, I think is one of the lessons here, the Tower card. That security is somewhat of an illusion as well. Maybe we feel secure financially today, but there's no real guarantee that that's true tomorrow. Or maybe we feel insecure today, and there's no guarantee that that'll be true in 20 years, right? We all grow and change, and that's what life is about. We get the Ace of Cups here. This surprising new beginning for her in this iteration was just kind of too much to take. Yeah, it's a ton of burdens and guilt too, which makes me curious whether she feels guilt in today's world. Now, of course, she can spin a tale like no other in today's iteration, but uh, I don't think that was the case in this one. I think she slowly has learned, or in this current life, she learned to lie a lot better. Um, the Ace of Wands, like, fiery new change that goes along with the Ace of Cups. It's just things that some people can't handle. So I guess the overall theme here for us as wanting to grow spiritually is um, that we just kind of have to ride the changes. Now, for her, I think she just really can't handle them. I think this explains the willingness to probably do whatever she needs to do to get out of prison in today's life. I think she will. We get the Page of Swords, spies in the camp, betrayal, immaturity. We never can be quite positive who we can trust. Um, Now, I don't think we're supposed to take that too far, but I think it is true that really we only know the thoughts in our head, and so therefore we don't know the thoughts in other people's heads. And um, that can lead to some shocking developments, especially around, the way she died in this iteration. A lot of people are shocked when people choose to unalive themselves uh, because maybe they were perceived as being happy and not trying to upset anybody that's experienced this. I've experienced it myself. Uh, but it's true. We really don't know what's going on in people's heads. We don't know how dark depression can get for some people. Money is not everything, although to her, I think it is, in this iteration for sure. Um, and stability isn't everything either. We can always start over. It's kind of a great philosophy of, if your day's going bad, we'll just pretend and start over. Now, that's easy for me to say, hard to do, but it's kind of true, right? It's like you can always start over. If we lose a job, we can find a new job. If, it might not be easy, and the adjustment period might be super hard, but that is true. And just because we have circles of support around money doesn't mean that we always will have them. I think in this iteration of her as the merchant's wife, I think there were several supports around money around both her and the person she was married to. And then once the rumor got out that they weren't doing business correctly, it's like all those supports left. People abandoned them. So we have to work to keep our support. So loss and dramatic change and losing support systems ultimately was something that she couldn't handle. Um, she valued money, career, and kind of status above everything else. So that way, when she lost it, it was super devastating, as it would be to anybody, but in this case, it was so devastating she decided to exit. So, dramatic change leads to big burdens and self-sabotage because of the lack of stability. The Four of Pentacles, Page of Swords, Ten of Wands, and the Tower card. Um, Underneath, I think she always thought of herself as being, in this iteration, but the merchant's wife iteration, she always thought of herself as being secure, and then she found herself being alone with the Hermit card, and then judgment was passed, and then ultimately justice um, happened, if you want to call it that, because I do believe they both were cheats. Although I doesn't feel like she was necessarily aware of it, but who knows? She could have been. Um, this isn't an exact science by any stretch of the imagination. The second iteration I picked up on was during the Tudor era. In in England. I guess this is probably. I'm pretty sure it involves Richard II, so the 1500s, mid 1500s maybe. Um, so she was a court confidant or worked with the royal family. I don't think she was royal herself, although could have been on a distant level. Certainly was not treated as a royal. Um, and she worked with doing remedial tasks of bringing food and waiting on the royals and stuff along those lines. And then um, at some point, probably at an age that we would think was far too young, um, but that's the way it was. I think she started having an affair with uh, Richard II, at his behest, not at hers, uh, because he was having a hard time producing heirs, and um, she wasn't the only one, by the way. There were several, and she never did get pregnant. Richard II had no heirs, and what had happened is that I can see this like conversation between her and another significant person in the royal family, not Richard II. Um, and it's like she's sitting there explaining that she doesn't understand why she's not getting pregnant. Um, and then I think this led to her spreading, or this led to the gossip that he was probably infertile. And ultimately, I think she was just taken away and dealt with, so to speak, ended, and then erased from all sorts of history if she was ever going to be a part of it. So, but again, it's this common theme of like trusting rich and powerful men. And I think this is like just a theme that is consistent throughout most of the lifetimes I picked up on, or at least the ones we're going to talk about. So, what are we supposed to learn about this one? We're supposed to learn about this Tudor era life. We're supposed to learn about this. Well, the Four of Wands popped out. This is the card for marriage, of course. Um, it's dangerous to have affairs uh, with royals in particular, I guess. It's supposed to learn. Yeah, that And this life, it really did feel like she was quite innocent, and things were wildly inappropriate by at least today's standards. But again, there's like this, there's naiveness, but there's also cunning, right? She was naive to do what she did, but she was cunning to get into a position to be able to do it. So, yeah, the Fool card, it's like, this ability to create this new life. Now, what that was in her head and what that was going to be in reality were probably two different things. Because I'm pretty sure if she'd had a child for Richard II, that would have probably not necessarily ended well for her either. Um, and we get the Wheel of Fortune, we make choices and we never know how they're going to turn out. Um, and I think that's true for her. We get the Hierophant as well. The church, the Pope. Um, I think this is more about betraying spirituality. I mean, certainly I'm not going to say what's moral and amoral. I don't think that's for anyone to determine except for the individual, unless it harms other people, I should say. Um, in this case, I think, you know, the I think she knew what she was doing wasn't correct, but at the same time, the age thing, I think she's kind of innocent, right? It's not really any culpability. The end of a cycle, of course, I do think this, if I remember my history correctly, this is the end of kind of that lineage in the royal family. And we get the Ace of Swords, the truth. The truth is both powerful and with the wrong person, dangerous. And I think in this case, she found out it was dangerous. I think in today's iteration, she might actually find out that it's quite powerful. We'll have to see when we read on that. We get the Ten of Pentacles, inheritance, uh, offspring, um, valuing this idea of being royal, even though I don't think she was. If she was, it was way not way diluted, as I guess that's probably how they'd say it. The Knight of Cups. This is this misguided idea of romantic attraction. Of course, I think she was too young for that to happen consensually at this time, but I do think that's the lesson here is that just because somebody wants, finds you attractive doesn't mean you have to find them attractive, right? Doesn't mean you have to like start a relationship. I do think, the Queen of Cups is here, um, because I do think in some perverse way, this leads to some of the actions of today and like wanting to learn what it's like to be on the other side of the foot, I guess, of the person causing the problems rather than the person that was the victim. And in this case, I consider her the victim. And the Four of Cups, just apathy. I think this was exciting for her. I think the truth she found out that sometimes it's dangerous to know the truth. Um, I think she was put in this situation and she kind of thought this was a good thing for her. And then I think later she was probably realizing and begging for her life. I think it turned out quite badly. Life is a gamble. Cycles always end with the world and the Ten of Pentacles. And I do think this is, I think the reason why she was so successful at being so awful in this life is because she could understand from this previous life, what it takes to manipulate or groom, as the Republicans would like to say. So, um, yeah, messages, dangerous messages of value. And then she was forced to walk away, and it was complete and utter downfall. The Ten of Swords and the Five of Pentacles lost. So I don't think this ended very well for her at all. Okay, the third iteration was a bit troubling to view, and then we'll take a look at her current iteration and what we're supposed to learn from it, or what she's supposed to learn from it. We'll see what the cards want to say. But this next iteration, and I'm just doing these kind of what I think is chronological, might not be exact, but this appears to be like the late 1600s, early 1700s. I think her life started in the late 1600s, ended in the early 1700s. And in this iteration, she was a man and was part of the orchestration of the big slave trade. Figuring out how that was all going to work. She herself was not um, like, well, she was a he in this iteration, so he, I guess, wasn't wealthy or anything like that, just a worker. But again, trying to make this like influence up to the people in power, and ultimately, you know, just too much talking about where things were, what they were doing, how they were kidnapping people, um, which I think the stories were disturbing that were being told, and this ultimately, I think, led to him, who was her, uh, being murdered, um, just because people didn't want to know how egregious the actual act of the trade was and how many people died along the route. Uh, you know, they just didn't want that to be out there. So again, this idea of trusting someone, I don't know if the person that she trusted was wealthy, perhaps, but at least had more power than her or him at the time. So what are we supposed to learn from this iteration? I don't think this parallels today's life so much as it maybe adds context into the things that were experienced in past lives. Yeah, we get the boat. I think that's a good representation here. Um, moving forward can be dangerous. Um, and we get justice. I think ultimately there is a karmic justice. Um, again, not putting any guilt or innocence on this particular life, because I don't think any of us know what we would have done if we were in that era, in that position, um, contrary to what we might believe. It's kind of like if you think about what you would do if you were 5 or 6 years old in the late 30s in Germany. I don't think it's really true. What you think you would do and what you would do is two different things. The magician here, really able to garner influence from nothing. It seems to be a theme of hers. And then we get betrayal, heartache, the Three of Swords, and we get the Ten of Pentacles. This sort of social inheritance, I think, is what this is really about. Is that there's little pieces of these three lives kind of mixed up into all of this life that she's currently living. I think that's why the Ten of Pentacles keeps popping up, along with the Five of Pentacles, because they all seem to end fairly tragically. We'll kind of see how this one ends. We don't know how it'll end exactly. And greed, the Nine of Cups. the greedy merchant. I think that plays into both the first one we talked about and this last one. Um, you know, what happened was inevitable. I think there's also some hints here at overseas travel and intrigue by traveling a lot. And then we get the King of Cups, this um, consistent and empathetic energy that I think is what she's supposed to be learning, but not able to learn. So moving forward, the social inheritance is following her around, and she's supposed to learn the empathy from it. I don't think that's happened in this iteration, but maybe future. Um, Greedy merchants, again, social inheritance. And then she just has this way of conjuring things into existence to where she's around these people that are more powerful than her, even though there's not necessarily a reason that in this current life that she has that the people around her were more powerful than her. Um, Loss and betrayal is sort of the karmic justice that she goes through, and it's almost inevitable that it happens. So underneath here we have the abuse of power with the Emperor card, and then the Nine of Wands, guardrails or captivity and loss. Um, yeah, as a is an intense um, experience doing some of these. Okay, so what are we supposed to learn about, or what is she supposed to learn? I'm not sure what the right question is here. What are we supposed to know about today's iteration of her life? We're supposed to know about today's iteration of her life. We're supposed to know about today's iteration. Do you feel that um, she again is too trusting of rich men, or um, and I do think that there's some social inheritance of the perversity from the previous lives, but certainly does not excuse anything whatsoever. Just does feel like this life does break some cycle here, is what it feels like. I don't know that it does, but it does feel that way. Um, I think she knows that the truth is both powerful and dangerous. And now that she knows that, I think that makes her more cunning. So yeah, giving and receiving of information, she understands the power of that better than most people. I don't think this is money. I think this is actual information. And the Four of Swords here, the illness that's part of this life. Um, and again, social inheritance, the Ten of Pentacles, or just inheritance. I do think, there's something to it just being inheritance in this iteration. But I think it keeps popping up for a lot of reasons. I think there's this kind of these things weave together a little bit in what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Can be a little bit based upon what you see in your life. Doesn't excuse anything, but I do think that's true. It's kind of like if you grow up in a battered home, um, you yourself are more likely to be battered or a batterer. It's just kind of the way things are. Um, the Nine of Pentacles, she seems to always be given everything that she needs to kind of succeed in life, and she seems to fail. because she gets tied up with the wrong people, in particular romantic partners. That doesn't apply to the third iteration we talked about, but it does to the first two. Although the one with the Tudor era, I think calling it romantic is a little bit misguided. We get the Four of Wands. Again, this, cunningness around people to work her way up into these spheres of influence is just something that's just really common. Now, she had a leg up in this iteration, but she's able to conjure things. She just really is, and control and manipulate in ways that others can't, which is why, unfortunately, she was so successful at doing what she did. And we get the Queen of Wands and the environment around. This is the prosecutor that put an end to this iteration and the greed. So knowing information being given and receiving is of great value, that relationships are points of manipulation and for her, and a way to obtain influence from people that are very greedy. She can conjure and convince and manipulate in a very disgusting way. And she'll do that she'll do whatever it takes to try to keep this partnership. Because if you think about all these partnerships, except for the third one, I think, the second one I have a hard time kind of just because of the age, but, I think, she wouldn't have wanted them to end. And that's kind of her inheritance. In this lifetime, she's quite sick mentally. Um, doesn't excuse anything. It's just true. I mean, you have to be to do what she did. And she kind of has everything she needs to do to manipulate people. And then this ended slightly different because it ended with prosecution rather than uh, the more dramatic just ending of life. It was inevitable. I think, there's just a lot of, she thrives off of a lot of fighting in this iteration. And again, she knows the truth and she knows its value. And I think she's going to try to use it to make life more stable for herself in this iteration. So complicated stories, fascinating, and a little bit disturbing on all levels. So, all right. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with another video soon.